Hey everyone, welcome back. It's so great to be here with you today. This is your space to just unwind and listen to a piece of history. Today, our story begins in St. Petersburg. Picture a young woman riding through the dark streets. The morning air is cold. Soldiers are gathering around her. Church bells begin to ring. She is wearing a simple black dress, but there is determination in her eyes. Only hours earlier, she was an unwanted wife living under the shadow of her husband. Now, the soldiers are calling her their ruler. But this woman is not Russian. She was born in Germany. She has no Russian blood, and the man she is about to remove from power is the Emperor of Russia, her own husband. If she fails, she may lose everything: her position, her freedom, perhaps even her life. But if she succeeds, she will take control of one of the largest empires on earth. How did a little-known German princess become Catherine the Great? How did a foreign bride win the loyalty of Russia, seize her husband's throne, and rule for more than 3 decades? And what price did she and millions of others pay for her greatness? This is the story of Catherine the Great. Take a slow breath, listen carefully, and let us travel back to 18th century Europe. You do not need to understand every word. Simply follow the story, one sentence at a time. Before she became Catherine, her name was Sophie. Sophie Augusta Frederica was born in 1729 in Stettin, a city that was then part of Prussia. Today, the city is called Szczecin and lies in Poland. Her father was a German prince, but he was not rich or powerful. Her family had a noble name, yet very little land and limited influence. Sophie grew up in a world where royal daughters were rarely asked what they wanted. Their marriages were political decisions. A princess might be sent far away to marry a man she hardly knew. Her personal happiness mattered less than the needs of her family. But Sophie was not a quiet, ordinary child. She was intelligent, curious, and unusually observant. She learned French, studied religion, read history, and paid close attention to the adults around her. She wanted to understand not only what people said, but also why they said it. That ability would later help her survive one of the most dangerous royal courts in Europe. When Sophie was still a teenager, an extraordinary opportunity appeared. Empress Elizabeth of Russia was searching for a wife for her nephew and heir, Peter. Peter was a young German prince who had been brought to Russia. One day, he was expected to become emperor. Sophie's family was not the most powerful family in Europe. She was not the richest or most famous possible bride, but she had useful family connections, and Empress Elizabeth approved of her. In 1744, Sophie received an invitation that would change her life. She was to travel to Russia and be considered as a bride for the future emperor. She was only 14 years old when she began the long journey east. She was leaving behind her language, her religion, her home, and almost everything familiar to her. She could not have known whether Russia would welcome her or destroy her. When Sophie arrived at the Russian court, she immediately understood something important. If she wanted to survive, it was not enough to marry Peter. She had to win Russia. The court was filled with beauty and danger. People wore rich clothes, spoke softly, and smiled politely. But behind those smiles were ambition, jealousy, and fear. One careless sentence could create an enemy. One offended noble could damage her future. Sophie began studying the Russian language with great determination. She practiced for hours, trying to understand the words, sounds, and customs of her new country. Russian was difficult for her, and she never completely lost her foreign accent. But the effort itself mattered. People saw that the young German princess was trying to become one of them. She also prepared to leave the Lutheran faith of her childhood and enter the Russian Orthodox Church. This was not a small change. Religion was deeply connected to identity, family, and political power. Her father reportedly disliked the idea, but Sophie knew that refusing could end her future in Russia. In 1744, She converted to Orthodox Christianity and received a new name. Catherine Alexeyevna. Sophie, the German girl, was beginning to disappear. Catherine, the future Russian ruler, was taking her place. A year later, in 1745, 16-year-old Catherine married Peter. The wedding was grand. The court celebrated. From the outside, it looked like the beginning of a perfect royal life. It was not. The marriage soon became deeply unhappy. Peter had grown up with his own wounds. He had lost his parents when he was young and was sent to a foreign court, just as Catherine had been. But instead of bringing them together, their shared loneliness pushed them apart. Peter often appeared immature and emotionally distant. He was fascinated by military games and deeply admired Prussia, especially King Frederick the Great. Catherine, meanwhile, was becoming more serious, disciplined, and politically aware. They lived in the same royal world, but they did not understand each other. Catherine had traveled across Europe to become the wife of Russia's future emperor. Now she discovered that the man beside her might be the greatest danger to her future. For years, Catherine had little real power. Empress Elizabeth controlled the court. Peter was the official heir. Catherine's main duty was to produce a child who could continue the royal line. Behind the palace walls, however, she was often lonely. She could not return to the life she had known in Germany. Her relationship with Peter was cold. And at court, friendship was rarely simple. People came close because they wanted influence, information, or protection. So Catherine turned to books. She read history, politics, philosophy, law, and literature. She studied the ideas of European thinkers who argued that rulers should use reason to improve society. Books became more than an escape. They became her private education in power. Catherine also learned by watching Empress Elizabeth. She observed how the empress rewarded loyalty, managed powerful families, used ceremonies, and protected her authority. Catherine was not yet ruling Russia, but she was studying the job. For years, Catherine had little real power. Empress Elizabeth controlled the court. Peter was the official heir. Catherine's main duty was to produce a child who could continue the royal line. Behind the palace walls, however, she was often lonely. She could not return to the life she had known in Germany. Her relationship with Peter was cold. And at court, friendship was rarely simple. People came close because they wanted influence, information, or protection. So Catherine turned to books. She read history, politics, philosophy, law, and literature. She studied the ideas of European thinkers who argued that rulers should use reason to improve society. Books became more than an escape. They became her private education in power. Catherine also learned by watching Empress Elizabeth. She observed how the empress rewarded loyalty, managed powerful families, used ceremonies, and protected her authority. Catherine was not yet ruling Russia, but she was studying the job. In 1754, she gave birth to a son named Paul. Officially, Paul was Peter's child and the future heir. However, questions about his biological father have continued for centuries. Catherine's own writings helped create this uncertainty. But the matter cannot be proved with complete confidence. Soon after Paul was born, Empress Elizabeth took control of the child's care. Catherine had fulfilled her royal duty, yet she had little influence over her own son. It was another painful lesson. At the Russian court, even motherhood belonged to the empire. But Catherine did not allow disappointment to make her disappear. She built relationships. She listened carefully. She learned which officers were respected, which nobles were dissatisfied, and which people might support her one day. Her husband had been born closer to the throne. Catherine was quietly learning how to hold it. In January 1762, Empress Elizabeth died. Peter became Emperor Peter III of Russia. For Catherine, this should have been a moment of safety. She was now the wife of the emperor. Instead, her position became more dangerous than ever. Peter deeply admired Frederick the Great of Prussia. Russia had fought against Prussia during the 7 Years' War and had made serious sacrifices. But soon after becoming emperor, Peter ended Russia's war against Prussia and returned conquered territory. Some Russians saw the decision as a betrayal. Peter also began changing military traditions and discussing a new war connected to his German lands. His actions quickly angered important members of the army, the church, and the nobility. Catherine understood what was happening. The new emperor was losing support, but Peter's political weakness did not automatically make Catherine safe. Their marriage had collapsed. Both had formed other relationships. There were rumors that Peter might divorce Catherine, remove her from court, or place her in a convent. If that happened, she could lose her son and all hope of a future. Catherine now faced a terrible choice. She could wait and allow Peter to decide her fate, or she could act first. By this time, Catherine had supporters among powerful Guards officers. One of the most important was Grigory Orlov, an officer who had become her lover. Orlov and his brothers had connections inside the military. They believed that Peter was dangerous to Russia and that Catherine could replace him. A plan for a coup began to form. A coup is a sudden attempt to remove a government or ruler from power. It was an enormous risk. Catherine was a foreign-born woman with no direct legal right to rule Russia alone. If the soldiers rejected her, Peter could have her arrested. But if she waited too long, she might never have another chance. Then, in the summer of 1762, the danger became immediate. One of the men connected to the plan was arrested. The conspiracy might soon be discovered. Catherine could no longer wait. Everything would be decided in a single day. Early on the morning of June 28, according to the Russian calendar then in use, Catherine was awakened and warned that the plan was in danger. She left her residence and hurried toward St. Petersburg. There was little time to prepare. Catherine appeared before the Izmailovsky Guards wearing black. She asked the soldiers to protect her, the Orthodox faith, and Russia from the emperor's actions. The soldiers swore loyalty to her. Then another regiment joined her, and another. The movement grew quickly. Church leaders recognized Catherine as Russia's ruler. Crowds gathered. Soldiers cheered. Bells rang across the city. Catherine changed into a military uniform and mounted a horse. The foreign bride who had once arrived in Russia as a nervous teenager was now leading Russian troops against her own husband. Peter was outside the capital when he learned what had happened. He tried to respond, but support around him was collapsing. Orders were ignored. Allies disappeared. The army did not rise to defend him. Catherine had spent years building relationships with the people Peter had offended. Now those relationships decided the future of the empire. Peter was arrested and forced to give up the throne. The coup had succeeded with surprisingly little fighting. Catherine was now the ruler of Russia, but her position was still not secure. Peter remained alive, and as long as he lived, his supporters might attempt to restore him. 8 days after his removal, Peter died while being held at Ropsha. The exact circumstances of his death remain uncertain. He may have been killed during a struggle with the men guarding him. Some historians have suspected murder, but there is no clear proof that Catherine ordered his death. What is certain is that his death removed the greatest immediate threat to her new throne. Catherine presented herself as the savior of Russia, but behind the celebration stood an uncomfortable truth. She had taken power through a military coup against her husband, and now that husband was dead. The German bride had won the Russian throne. Keeping it would be even harder. Catherine was crowned Empress of Russia in Moscow in September 1762. She understood that a crown alone could not make her legitimate. She had to prove that Russia was stronger with her than without her. Catherine worked constantly. She read reports, wrote letters, studied laws, and communicated with officials across the empire. She wanted Europe to see her as an enlightened ruler, a monarch who used education, science, and reason to improve her country. She corresponded with famous thinkers, including Voltaire and Denis Diderot. She wrote about laws and education, She supported art, theater, literature, and scientific work. Her art collection later became the foundation of the Hermitage Museum, now one of the most famous museums in the world. In 1767, Catherine called together representatives from different parts of the empire to discuss a new system of laws. She prepared a document known as the Nakaz, or instruction. It spoke about justice, reason, and the responsibilities of government. The ideas sounded modern. Turning those ideas into reality was much more difficult. Russia was enormous. Its people spoke many languages and followed different traditions. Powerful nobles wanted to protect their land, wealth, and control over the peasants who worked for them. Catherine needed the nobility because they had helped place her on the throne. That dependence limited how far she could reform the country. This contradiction became central to her reign. Catherine admired the language of freedom and reason, but she ruled as an autocrat, a ruler with enormous personal power. She spoke of justice, but millions of Russian peasants remained serfs, legally tied to the land and controlled by wealthy landowners. In some ways, their position became worse under her rule. Catherine wanted to change Russia, but she also wanted to remain in power. When reform threatened the support of the nobility, power usually came first. Catherine did not earn the title the Great only through books and art. She also expanded Russia's power. During her reign, Russia fought major wars against the Ottoman Empire. Russian armies won important victories, and the empire gained greater influence around the Black Sea. In 1783, Russia annexed Crimea. New ports, towns, and settlements appeared in southern territories. Russia's position in Europe grew stronger. Catherine became one of the most powerful rulers of her time, but expansion brought suffering as well as glory. Wars killed soldiers and civilians. New territories were placed under imperial control. Different peoples were forced to live under decisions made far away in St. Petersburg. Catherine also played a major role in the partitions of Poland. Russia, Prussia, and Austria divided large parts of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth between themselves. By 1795, Poland had disappeared from the map as an independent state. For Russia, this was a major increase in territory and influence. For the Polish people, it was a national disaster. Catherine's greatness, therefore, depended on the point of view of the person telling the story. To Russian imperial history, she was a successful ruler who made the country larger and stronger. To many people who lost land, freedom, or political independence, she represented conquest. History is rarely simple, and Catherine was never a simple woman. The greatest danger inside Catherine's empire came from the people at the bottom of society. In 1773, a man named Yemelyan Pugachev led a huge rebellion. He claimed to be Peter III, Catherine's dead husband, miraculously returned. The claim was false, but many people followed him. Why? Because anger was already everywhere. Serfs suffered under landowners. Workers faced harsh conditions. Cossacks feared losing their independence. Different groups had their own reasons to resist the government. The rebellion spread across a large area. Towns were attacked. Landowners were killed. Government forces struggled to restore control. For Catherine, the uprising was more than a military problem. It was a reminder that her throne had been taken from Peter, and that some people still believed his name could be used against her. The rebellion was eventually defeated. Pugachev was captured and executed in 1775. But Catherine had seen how quickly anger could become revolution. Afterward, she became more careful and more dependent on the nobles. The woman who had once spoken boldly about reform now gave greater protection to the ruling class. She had survived another threat. But the distance between Catherine's enlightened words and the lives of ordinary Russians continued to grow. From the outside, Catherine appeared to have everything. She had palaces, armies, wealth, influence, and the attention of Europe. But power did not bring complete safety. Catherine had many close relationships during her life. Some men became her lovers, advisors, military leaders, or political partners. The most important of them may have been Grigory Potemkin. Potemkin was intelligent, ambitious, and imaginative. He helped Catherine develop Russia's southern territories and played a major role in imperial policy. Their relationship was deeply personal as well as political. Even after their romance changed, they remained closely connected. Yet Catherine's private life also became a weapon used against her. Political enemies spread stories about her relationships. Later generations repeated many rumors, some exaggerated, and some completely false. Powerful men often had lovers without having their ability to rule reduced to their private lives. Catherine was judged differently because she was a woman. Still, there was another side to her loneliness. She could reward people with wealth, titles, and land. But how could she know whether they loved Catherine the woman or Catherine the empress? The palace was filled with people, yet absolute power made complete trust almost impossible. Her relationship with her son Paul was also difficult. Paul had been taken from her care when he was a baby. As he grew older, he became increasingly suspicious of his mother. He knew that Catherine had taken the throne from his father. Catherine, in turn, doubted Paul's judgment and feared what he might do as ruler. The woman who controlled a vast empire could not repair the deepest divisions inside her own family. That may have been one of the hidden prices of her crown. As Catherine grew older, Europe began to change. In 1789, the French Revolution broke out. The revolution removed the French monarchy and eventually sent King Louis XVI and Queen Marie Antoinette to their deaths. Catherine had once welcomed the language of reason and reform. Now those ideas appeared connected to rebellion, violence, and the destruction of kings. She became more conservative. Writers who criticized Russian society could face censorship, prison, or exile. Catherine still loved books, but she feared what certain books might inspire people to do. The young foreign princess had once survived by adapting to change. The older empress increasingly feared change she could not control. Catherine continued working until the end of her life. In November 1796, she suffered a stroke at the Winter Palace. She died the following day at the age of 67. Her son Paul finally became emperor. Catherine had ruled Russia for 34 years. She had arrived as a teenage German bride with no guarantee of a future. She died as one of the most powerful women in European history. And so, my friends, we return to the young girl who traveled east. She was not born Russian. She was not born to inherit Russia's throne. She entered the country because other people had chosen a husband and a future for her. But Sophie learned something very early. If she could not choose the world she entered, she could choose how she responded to it. She learned a new language. She accepted a new religion. She studied the people around her. She read, listened, waited, and prepared. Her husband was born closer to the throne, but Catherine understood Russia better than he did. And when the moment came, she acted. She transformed herself from Sophie, the little-known German princess, into Catherine, Empress of Russia. But her story should not be reduced to a simple lesson about courage. Catherine was intelligent, disciplined, and remarkably adaptable. She was also ambitious, calculating, and willing to use force. She supported education and culture, yet ruled with absolute power. She spoke about justice, yet protected a system that kept millions of people in servitude. She strengthened Russia, but other nations paid a terrible price for its expansion. This is what makes Catherine's story so powerful. She was neither only a hero, nor only a villain. She was a human being, shaped by fear, ambition, loneliness, opportunity, and choice. Perhaps her greatest talent was not simply intelligence. It was her ability to become the person each new moment required. A German girl became a Russian Grand Duchess. An ignored wife became a careful political observer. A threatened woman became the leader of a coup. And a foreign bride became Catherine the Great. Her life leaves us with a difficult question. Did Catherine seize the throne because Russia needed her, or because she needed the throne? Perhaps the answer is both, and perhaps that is why, more than 200 years after her death, The world is still telling her story. Every story you understand is another step forward in your English journey. You do not need to remember every name, date, or word. Keep listening. Keep following the meaning. Little by little, English will begin to feel less like a foreign language and more like a world you know how to enter. Which part of Catherine's life surprised you the most? Was she a great reformer, a ruthless conqueror, or both? Share your answer in the comments. And if you would like to learn English through another unforgettable life, subscribe and join us for the next story.